Phylogenetic trees can be built using molecular data. There's a couple ways to use molecular data. We'll talk about using molecular data as a trait or as a characteristic, similar to how we use morphological data. This is not the way we typically do things currently, but it's an important comparison and good to think about as comparing other molecular methods and also morphological. We'll consider these 4 critters again: dog, civet, cats, and hyenas, and we'll consider 4 positions, 4 loci in a gene. We'll cherry pick out 4 polymorphic positions, 4 polymorphic loci. So in this particular gene, we'll look at the 6th position, the 8th, the 12th, and the 13th. These are 4 polymorphic loci. We'll use a dash to represent an indel. So there's an indel here, and then everything else is coded with A, T, C's, and G's. We could also consider polypeptides, amino acids. You can also do this with RNA. Anything that has a sequence, you can use in a phylogenetic analysis. So if we were to build a phylogenetic tree from this, how would we do it? Well, first we have a clade here. All of these organisms are grouped together. That's what we knew previously from looking at the morphological data. Also here in this position, we have a clade here in position 8. All the organisms have a C. And then also here in position 13, all of the organisms in this clade have an A. I think I said all the organisms. I was referring to all of the phyloform. All of the cat clade members have a C in this position and an A in this position. So we've established that they're a group. So far, the genetic data lines up with the morphological data. We have dogs on one branch of our tree, and we have everything else. So let's look at this last position. It's G in dogs, it's C in civets, and it's C in hyenas, and then it's different in cats. It's T in cats. So this is interesting because based on these data, and let's assume these are the only data we have, that would mean that hyenas and civets are more similar to each other genetically. So let's draw out, if we just had access to these data, let's draw out what the tree would be. So we have dogs up here. And then we have civets and hyenas share a trait there. So we're going to put them together and then put cats here. So we've actually put hyenas and civets together in a clade based on these data. This is actually something that happens all the time when using phylogenetic methods, is different data sets yield different tree topologies and different methods yield different tree topologies. So it's very common to compare things like morphology versus DNA, DNA from the mitochondria versus nuclear DNA, and to build phylogenetic trees with different methods and different data sets to see where are the consistent patterns and to determine multiple sources of data. Because evolution is complicated. There's many different evolutions. In theory, you can have an evolutionary event like a C mutates into a T and then goes back to a C sometime in evolutionary time. Lots of complicated things can happen, so it's good to use as much data as possible and to compare and contrast. It turns out that if we used more data than just these 4 bases, we do using molecular traits, we get trees similar to the morphological data. In this case, we would consider the nucleotide bases, the loci, as our trait or as our character. So we have 4 loci, 4 base positions. Each one of these we would consider a trait. So we have 1 trait, 2 traits, 3 traits, 4 traits, each one of these positions. And each of these can take on 5 different states. It can be A, T, C, or G, or an indel. So we can think of it as possibly transitioning between A, T, C, G, and an indel. And this can result in potentially complicated evolutionary histories where the A could turn into a T, or an A could, that's going back to the T, A could turn into T, A could go to C, A could go to G, and A could go to indel, and all other possible combinations. When you have these character states, these multi-state characters or multi-state traits, evolution can start to get more complicated. Let's add another species to our matrix. Let's add a bear, and let's say it is G, 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 C. One of the first things you can see is that there is a clade of the indel here, and then there's a clade without the indel here. So one hypothesis would be that there's bears and dogs in one clade, and then everything else is in another clade. Let's see if that remains consistent. Well, we already know based on that position, there's a clade. Based on that position, there's a clade. The bear has a G and not a C, so they stay out of that clade. They have a C and not an A, they stay out of that clade. However, then if we examine this position, 13, bears and dogs are similar. Also here, bears and dogs are similar. But then here, there is a difference. We can expand out our initial clade. We had a dog clade and a dog and bear clade and an everything else clade. We can split out dogs, bears, and then as we did before, branch them like that. Now let's consider two more species. First, let's consider polar bears. Let's give them the same sequence as our previous bear. And then let's add pandas to it. Let's look at our similarities here. So we still have this indel clade and then not indels. So our bears are still linking with our dogs. We have a G here, but an A there. So we have a polar bear clade here, a feliform clade here, and then dogs are separate. We have a G here and a G here, and then C here, and then a C here. So think about how you would draw this. We would have our main branches here. Our feliforms would look something like this. Civets, hyena, cat. And then our bears, and this hypothesis makes sense. Polar bear would here, and then panda bears. Pandas are bears. Go up there, and dogs are up there. So this trait here, this position 8, groups together the polar bear and the panda, forming this clade here. Now let's drop our panda, and let's try another bear, the sun bear. And let's say this is not true, but let's say the sun bear has an indel. We're considering the same 4 positions. Polar bear and sun bear have a G there. Polar bear and sun bear have a G there, and then they have a C. This C links them in the dog clade. This G links them in the dog clade. And then this A sets them separate from the dog clade. So just like in our previous example, we put dogs on one branch, and then we put our bear species 1 and bear species 2 here. And here we have an indel, and this does happen. This would be a case of convergent evolution. This indel, let's put position 6, and in this indel happened here, and then this indel happened over here. It's a case of convergence. They both happened, but that happens in evolution. This would be the most parsimonious way of mapping it. A less parsimonious way of mapping it would be to say, well, maybe this indel is ancestral. Maybe all the mammals we're considering, their ancestor, their common ancestor, had this indel in position 6. And so all of our other organisms, our cat, our civet, and our hyena, they all have that indel. They pass it on from there. And then also our sun bear, we'll put him right here, our sun bear also has that trait. However, in order for this to work, well, our polar bear doesn't have an indel and our dog doesn't have an indel. So we're going to have to get rid of that indel. We're going to have a reverse mutation, and we're going to have to get rid of that indel on the dog and the polar bear branches. So that's going to increase the number of evolutionary events by 2. It's going to make the tree longer. It's going to increase the tree length. And so that's a less parsimonious hypothesis. So In the absence of any other data, in the absence of any other information, in this case, we would get that information by looking at more species, by perhaps looking at multiple species of bear, looking for other things that are related to these mammals, trying to find an ancestor, trying to find an outgroup to see if they have that indel. But in the absence of that information, the more parsimonious explanation would be to put the indel on this branch and to not add it there, not get rid of it there.